Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusantathami Bhagavad Gite Bhavatveshinim Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullaravindayatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamutraya Krishnaya Geetam Mridatuhe Namaha Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. Welcome everyone to this next edition session of Bhagavad Gita. We are on chapter 2 and we will be finishing the first section of chapter 2 today, which is the most important portion discussing about Atma. So as always, let's start with a little bit of a reflection and a kind of a summary on how we left off last time. And for today, what I have is a very simple question. Actually, there's only two questions to this today. Who is really going through Punar Janma? And we have three choices here. It is Atma, is it the Jiva, or is it the gross body or the Stula Sharira? So three choices, Atma, Jiva, and the gross body. Who is really going through rebirth?
Atma?
Atma, no. It is not the Atma.
Stula Sharira.
It is not the Stula Sharira also. So that leaves only one choice, which is the Jiva. Correct. So it is the Jiva which is going through the rebirth. Atma does not have rebirth. Atma is changeless. And gross body has only one-time use, you know. So it's like, what is that? When you get a SIM card or something, you know, you have a one-time use. So that's what it is. Gross body is one-time use and it is done with. And it is the Jiva or the Sukshma Sharira, which actually goes through one birth after the other birth after the other birth. Okay, so that is the answer, Jiva. So last week, we reviewed some of the characteristics of Atma, which was covered in shlokas up to about 18 or even 19. And they were all these which we talked about, which was Nityaha, which is eternal, Satsvarupaha, of the nature of existence, Sarvagata, which is the nature of all-pervading, pervasiveness, Aprameya, which is the aspect that Atma is our own subject. Atma is not an object which we see. So we saw that. And it is a karta or a non-doer, a bhokta, a non-enjoyer. We all love to know that we did it something, right? So that is where the karta bhava comes in. And we also enjoy things. We have our sense organs, we can enjoy. Atma does not have any sense organs, so Atma cannot enjoy. Atma doesn't have any karmendriyas. Atma doesn't have hands, legs, any of the 5 karmendriyas. So Atma cannot do that as well. So that's why it is akarta, abhokta, and it is nirvikaraha, which is free from modifications. So that having said, in the last week, we went through a few more lakshanas of Atma and would like to know what are they. So can you name a few of the lakshanas or the characteristics or the properties of Atma which we went through in the last week?
Sanatana.
Sanatana. Yes, Sanatana is one of them. Yes, Amma. Thank you. Anything else? So the reason for mentioning these characteristics is because we know ourselves. If you were to ask me, what is your characteristics, Sunitha? If somebody would ask me, I can say I'm, 5.5 feet tall, 5 feet 5 tall, of certain weight, of certain color, all that, right?
Nityaha.
Nityaha was also, yes, it came last time again. That is true. Yes. Anything else?
Sarvasata.
Sarva?
Sarvasata.
Sarvasata. Sat was discussed before, but not Sarvasata. So the characteristics we discussed were na jayate. Okay. Atma is not born. Okay. It is birthless. Atma is birthless. Atma is deathless. So Atma is not born. Atma doesn't die. Maybe this is what you're referring to, I think, which is Shashvata. Shashvata, which is Atma does not decay. Like for example, us, right? We all have cells which decays, every year or every 8 years, everything gets replaced. So, but Atma doesn't have the possibility of any decay at all. Okay, and it is Puranaha. Amma mentioned Sanatana, which is similar to Puranaha. Sanatana, we'll be discussing it again this week. Then Avinashinam. Meenu actually mentioned this word Avinashi last time. Avinashinam, which is indestructible. And one more, which is Avyaya, which is immutable, which cannot be broken into parts. So this is the interesting thing about actually all of them are really our own characteristics. When we identify ourselves as Atma, then these are all our characteristics. But the problem for all of us is this. Now we are coming into a little bit of a review, okay? We think we are actually subject to the jayate. We said na jayate, namriyate, and then all the other things. So, but we think we are subject to birth and old age and disease and death. Well, you see, disease and death, we can understand that, right? We can understand it's no brainer for us. But we don't think that, we are beyond birth or beyond old age, right? Actually, we do our best to avoid all these old age, disease, and death. But what to do? We have to go through this. Steve Jobs actually said this beautifully. He said, even people who want to go to heaven, they really don't want to die to get there. So you see, we want to be eternally young. We want to be, so that is the characteristic of Atma. Atma is eternally young. It is Sanatanaha. It is Puratanaha. And we want to be that way. But we identify ourselves with the body so much, and therefore we our body dies and we think, I am dying, right? So we want to be this young, we want to look young. And this is where, if you think about it, there's hundreds of billions of dollars that, big cosmetic companies, pharmaceutical companies, all of them, they spend the time to preserve our youth and vigor. And we will do just about anything to look young, right? So that is that. But that aspect of where I'm spending a lot of my energy and a lot of those dollars is really not who I think I am. Truly, it is a case of mistaken identity. And another thing, which in relation to this death and disease, which we talked about, we experience so much of pain in our life when we lose somebody or even something of great value. It could be, a phone, or it could be something that broke in the house, or it could be, anything which is of great value. And so in all these cases, whether it's losing a loved one or losing something, it is really painful. So chapter 2 of this Bhagavad Gita, if we understand the concepts really well, we will find that we can have a grip, or we can understand the changes that is happening, but yet we can be detached from these changes. So this na jayate mriyate va kadachit nayam bhutva na bhavita na bhuyaha, we have to understand very clearly that for Atma, there is no birth or death. Atma has really not come into being into the body like us, or what we think we are. It does not come into being and will never, ever really come into a being as the way we think. We are that Atma, but we have mistaken ourselves to be this way. So that's the basic fundamental point that Lord Krishna wants to drive home that point. He's telling us we have been identifying ourselves. We have been identifying ourselves with all this body, mind, and intellect, which we are not, which we think who we are actually not this body. And this is really the classic case of mistaken identity that Lord Krishna wants us to think again and again. And you will see this pretty much throughout the entire Bhagavad Gita. But in this chapter 2, what we are discussing, which is the most powerful aspect, is this Jnana Yoga, which is making us remind that. And yes, it is very, very difficult for us to accept this. Basically, it is telling us that when we are looking at the mirror, and this is something that I think I would ask each one of us to do, is we do look at the mirror many times, right? Or we look at maybe polished surface to see ourselves. Let us remind ourselves that who I'm seeing in the mirror is not truly my identity. We are not seeing the real person when I look at ourselves. We are only seeing the real person is my notion, my true notion, which I have to recognize who I am that Atma. So in this regard, let us see that I'm not this body. I've put a very old picture here. Just so, one second, my video went off. I'm putting an old picture of a car here. This is to show that I identify myself with this external body here, which is this car. For example, this car here, right? I think I'm this. This, by the way, is a 1922 Ford T, I think. And we can put ourselves in that. Maybe I'm a 1980 or a 1960 or Asian Indian model, okay, something like that. You can put that. We are not this body here. We are this, we are actually that jiva. If I consider myself as somebody who's going through from birth to birth, I'm actually the jiva or the driver who is driving this vehicle here. And this vehicle has these eyes, which is the headlights, and the arms and the legs are these wheels and everything. So think of that way. Another way to look at it. I gave you two different. One is when I look at the mirror, remind myself that I am the Atma, not that external appearance. Second thing is when I look at a car, let me remind myself each time that I'm not like the car body. I'm actually the jiva who's driving that car. Okay. So just two different examples. So another reason why I put up this example of a car here is the car, which represents our body, which represents this car body, right? It is essentially taking me, helping me towards my final destination or my final goal. So our human goal is actually to recognize, to live in that knowledge that I am Atma. That is really my permanent home. And to recognize that this BMI complex, this body-mind complex that I am, is a temporary home. My BMI is helping me to recognize my spiritual identity of Atma. That is my true identity. And this is very important. And even as I recognize this, I have to recognize that this is the same thing which is in everybody. And there is no difference between my Atma or somebody else's Atma. Everything is that one Atma. So that is what is needed here. To do this is not an easy task. We have to develop a lot of our spiritual exercise or sadhana chatushtaya, for example. And doing all this, doing all our spiritual practices like japa and prayers and puja and everything will allow us to get to recognizing my spiritual identity of Atma as my permanent home. So this, in a nutshell, was the summary of what we did in the last few shlokas up to about 22. So in 20th shloka, which we discovered, which was the most powerful shloka here, which talked about this aspect of rebirth, we saw Najayate mriyate va kadachit nayam bhutva bhavita na bhuyah ajo nityah shashvato ayam puranaha na hanyate hanyamane sharire. So we discussed this last time about how it is nityah shashvataha, with no decay. It is ever new, puranaha indicating ever new, and this can never be killed or is never slain. So the conclusion from this, we said that our nature is this Atma Tattva. As Atma Tattva, I am neither a doer nor an enjoyer. And what does that mean? How does it relate to what Arjuna's question was? Is to remind Arjuna that he has to do his duty of the dharma that he has taken up. And in that sense, he's just doing his duty. He doesn't have to feel guilty, or he doesn't have to feel that he's the one who's killing or anything. And if he does do that, that is only because of his own delusion or his illusion of thinking that he's a body, mind, intellect. And that is the moha, that is the delusion, which is causing him the shoka or the grief. We saw this. And then we saw in this particular shloka, Veda vinashinam nityam, ya enam ajam avyayam, katham sa purushah partha, tham ghatayati hantikam. Essentially, again, trying to give some more qualities of that Atma, which is Avinashi, which is avyaya. It is to be understood. And once we understand that if I am that Atma, and if everybody is the Atma, then who is killing whom? That is why he's asking, Kam ghatayati hanta hanti kam. How can that person be a cause for slaying or anything? So it's just an extension of the previous shloka. In shloka number 22, then we talked about that if I am that Atma, then how is it that I see a lot of changes happening in this world? I see people dying, I see people being born. And this is where we discussed this aspect of rebirth. We talked about how this vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya navani ghrannati narani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. So just like a beautiful simile is given, just like, for example, when I have no need of certain clothes and I just give it off to Salvation Army, or if I don't need any of my furniture or anything, I give it up or anything. So too, the jiva, the subtle body, when it has exhausted its own prarabdha karmas, which we will discuss in chapter 3 and 4 when we talk about karma at that time, when it has given up all this, then it goes on into its next journey. And that is what he's saying here, which is once the external body, and the example I gave of the car is just like if my car becomes old, I go and buy a new car. So too, here he's saying that we give up our old body to get a new body, and so too, and that is shown here. And this was supported by 3 different ways. We discussed this last time. And this is so unique to our Hinduism, which talks about the fact that this rebirth can be looked at very scientifically. Now, science may not necessarily agree to it, but we can refute science in this also to show that it is only by rebirth can we explain the diversity. And we discussed this last time, so I won't go into details. Now, having said this, now we are coming to another aspect of understanding Atma. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha, na chainam kledayantyapaha, na shoshayati marutaha. So that Atma is so unique. And who is that Atma? The Atma which is in us, in everyone. That Atma cannot be destroyed at all. Period. If we look back in history, we have seen so many different destructions having gone through. We have seen major cities being destroyed by volcanoes. Some of you may have gone to Italy and seen this place, Pompeii, for example. In 7980, a huge volcano, totally within a few matter of hours, just buried a whole city. That was possible, and this is a combination of fire and heat and so many other things, and even the earth played a part in that. And then we have seen tsunamis, huge tsunamis, and now we are seeing viruses. But Atma can never ever be destroyed. Atma is the one which is ever there, and it can be even if you come with the human bomb, atom bomb, nuclear bomb, nothing. And that is what the na enam chindanti shastrani, shastra referring to earth-made weapons, dahati pavaka referring to fire, then apaha referring to water, marutaha referring to wind. None of these can ever touch Atma. And then in 24, if that Atma cannot be cut or cannot be burnt or cannot be wetted, by either fire or air or water or even dried, then what does that mean? It basically means that this Atma is the only thing which is everlasting. And that is what is said in the shloka here. I will just chant that. Achedyo yamadahyo yam. Achedyo yamadahyo yam. Akledyo shoshya evacha. Akleshoshya Akledyo shoshya evacha. Nitya sarvagatasthānuhu. Nitya sarvagatasthānuhu. Achaloyam sanatanaha. Achaloyam sanatanaha. So, I am Atma, this Atma, this absolute self, the truth, all the names that we talked about before. It is achedyaha. Achedyaha. It is uncleavable, uncuttable. And it is I am dahyaha. It cannot be burnt. It cannot be burned by fire. It's an extension of the previous shloka. It is akledyaha. It cannot be made wet. And it is ashocyaha. It cannot be dried. So it is eternal, it is timeless, and he says it is nitya. So here, nitya needs to be understood. That earlier we understood nitya as that it exists in all three periods of time. Here, it means that it is even beyond time. So it really exists beyond time. Now, this is something very hard for us to comprehend because we always feel that, we exist in time. But the fact is, time exists in it. Sometimes time may not be there, but Atma continues to be there. Time cannot exist without Atma. Atma has to be there even for time to exist. Then Sarvagataha, which we have talked about, that it is formless. It is formless, indicating that it is not conditioned at all, not even by space. When we talk about conditioning, for example, I'm conditioned by this body, by this mind, by my intellect. There is a level in which there's a level in which I can really think. So all this is conditioned by me. But this Atma is absolutely unconditioned. Even space cannot condition it. It is even more subtler, even more pervasive than space. To some extent, we can understand space, even though we cannot see space. But you can imagine Atma is even more subtler than space. The next things here he says is sthanuhu. Sthanuhu and achalaha. Two very sounds like, why did not Krishna use two similar names here? Because when you think sthanu means a pillar. Now, sthanu is very firm, right? And achala means no chala. Chala means movement. Achala means no movement. So how do we understand this? So even if I take a tree, for example, a tree can be firm at the base, but at the top, the leaves and the branches are all moving, right? So it may be sthanu at the base, but it is chala at the top. But this Atma is sthanu, it is firmly rooted, yet it is non-move, it doesn't move at all. And then Sanatanaha, we discussed this before also. Sanatanaha, like Puranaha, indicates that aspect which is always new. It is unconditioned by time or place. Typically, we say which is new or old based upon the time, something which was old before, now it is new. But if Atma is unconditioned by time and unconditioned by place, then it is Sanatanaha, it is ever fresh. That is why our Hinduism is also called Sanatana Dharma. It will be always fresh, always applicable at all times. Technologies may come and go. We may go to Mars, we may go to Jupiter, who knows where. But Hinduism is always going to be, the philosophy is ever fresh, it is Sanatana. And all this is indicating what? It is indicating our own nature. I am Sanatanaha. I am Puranaha. I am Achalaha. I am Stanuhu. I am Sarvagataha. I am Nityaha. That is my nature. Again, why are we saying all these fantastic words? It is only to remind us that all the small, small things that we get worried, they are not even a drop. It is far, far less when I compare to what my true nature is. And that's what these shlokas are trying to remind me in all this. We, for example, when we talk about Nityaha, for us, Nityaha, permanent, in our day-to-day transactions, if I live in this house for 30 years, I think this is my permanent home. This is Nityaha for me. Or if I'm in a job for 40 years, that is Nityaha, that is permanent. So we attribute this temporary and permanent distinctions based upon whether I'm getting daily wages versus monthly wages, or whether it is living in this in a temporary rental home versus in a home. All these things, we look at it as permanent. But the shloka is reminding us that our true nature is Nityaha, Sanatanaha. This is what we need to keep in mind, that that is my true nature. So in this regard, a beautiful shloka from Kathopanishad, which talks about Anyatra Dharmat, Anyatra Dharmat, Anyatra Asmat Krita Krit Akritat, Anyatra Bhutat Cha Bhavyat Cha, Yat Tat Pashyasi Tat Vada. We have Nachiketa, who goes to Lord Yama and asks for that knowledge which is beyond dharma, beyond any virtue, beyond any values. It is beyond any action and beyond any cause or effects. It is beyond the past or the future. Tell me of that knowledge. And that's what comes to my mind when we talk about this shloka, because Sarvagataha, which indicates all pervading beyond any limitations, is something akin to this. So even though there are some of the words which seem like we saw it before, like Nitya and all that, Bhagwan Shankaracharya ji in his beautiful Shankar Bhashya indicates that we need to be reminded constantly about these values, because like we have seen, whether it is the viruses that come and go or many other small things, in all these cases, we get bogged down. We need to be pulled up. We need to be told that you are infinite. You are this absolute Brahman, Atman. You can do anything you want, and you can really make this world shine. You can do so much of wonders. And that is why all these are brought to remind us again and again and again, this beautiful values. So now that we have talked so much about the self, and it sounds so beautiful, it sounds so glorious, don't you think we should be able to experience it? Wouldn't it be nice if I can, taste it, smell it, know this, know my own self, who is so glorious, is so fantastic. I need to know it, right? So shloka number 25 talks about a little on this aspect of, can we really experience the self? What does it mean? I will chant the shloka. Avyaktoyamachintyoyam. Avyaktoyamachintyoyam. Avikaryoyamuchyate. Avikaryoyamuchyate. Tasmat evam viditvainam. Tasmat evam viditvainam. Nanushochitum arhasi. Nanushochitum arhasi. So Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna that I am sorry, this self is avyaktaha, meaning it is unmanifest. That which cannot be known by senses, supreme self, which cannot be seen by ears, cannot be tasted, cannot be smelt, cannot be touched. It is unmanifest. It is achintya. It cannot even be thought of. It just cannot be even thought of. Sounds a little disappointing, isn't it? We have all this mind and intellect. I can try to purify my intellect so much to know this Atma. Why can't I do that? That's what comes to my mind, right? Achintya. It cannot be grasped. And it is avikara. Avikarya, I am, uchyate. It is said. And it is avikarya, which is not with any modifications. Tasmat evam viditvainam. Therefore, know this. Knowing this, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, tatham na anushochitum arhasi. So Anu here, beautiful upasarga used with the shosha, the word here. So Arjuna, this way of knowing the self, once you know this, why do you have to cry? You don't have to cry now, right? That's what he's trying to say. So how do we understand this word unmanifest? A thing is called unmanifest, or a thing is called manifest when we can perceive through any one of my 5 organs. I might hear some good music through my ears, or I might taste something through my mouth. I might touch something soft. I might smell something. It is only through those senses that I know something is manifest, right? So it is really hard for us to know how. So how do we understand this? So for this, the classic example is a tree. We know that a tree has to come from somewhere. And we know a tree comes from something which you can't even see it. And in Chandogya Upanishad, there are beautiful examples of this, about how the student takes the seed and he opens it, and literally he cannot even see anything there. It is an unmanifest. The whole tree is in an unmanifest form in that seed. And in that seed, which of course there is aspect of the trees in that, otherwise it wouldn't have grown, but it is unmanifest for our eyes. But that grows into a tree. So this Atma is unmanifest. It cannot be seen by the 5 sense organs. So how do we know this? It is only through the pramana, which is Shruti or Upanishads. Another way to understand unmanifest is deep sleep. When I go to sleep in the night, after I go through a dream state, I get into the state called deep sleep state. In that deep sleep state, I have no idea about who I am until I wake up the next day. So we do go through that unmanifest form, and this is another way to explain that there are states of unmanifest where Atma totally shines, and therefore they say in deep sleep, you have nothing but Atma and everything going into its causal body. So that's the unmanifest. Achintyaha or unthinkable. What does that mean? Unthinkable is, now that we understood that sense organs do not play a part in the manifest, Now here it is the aspect of the mind. So this Atma cannot even be thought about by the mind or the intellect. This example that I have here is, imagine this telescope gazer, this lady. He can see everything that is outside, but she cannot really see herself with the telescope because she herself is the subject. She cannot be the subject and the object. She cannot be the seer of what it is and the seen also. So she is a seer, so it cannot be seen. So this is achitya, so unthinkable at all, unthinkable at the level of the mind and intellect. Another way is Atma doesn't have any properties. So what has properties? Only something which has a form, a shape, all those have properties. So I have listed some of the chemical properties here for many of the materials here, like toxicity or heat of combustion or chemical stability or all these things. Think about any properties, whether it's weight, height, anything, nothing. Only something which has properties can undergo modification. But this is avikarya, which is totally without any modification. And because it has no modification, therefore it is unchangeable. And in that sense, so Lord Krishna is reminding Arjuna that because it's unmanifest, because it is unthinkable, unchangeable, so once you understand that is who you are, and we understand that that is the same Atma in Bhishma and Karna and Drona and all the teachers, your cousins and everyone, when you know that, na anushochanti, why are you grieving? You don't have to grieve at all, that everything is Atma. So this is the meaning of this. So with this 25, we now come to almost a completion of the Atma Tattva. So we see that having explained so much, Arjuna is still crying. He's saying, okay, I understand now that about Nitya Vastu and permanent reality and absolute reality and all that. But I see that everything is also continuously dying and it is being born. How can you explain that to me? So Krishna tries to tell him that that which is dying and being born are nothing but only names and forms. But even in the midst of that, the Atman is permanent and eternal. And so he takes him now to one notch down to explain from the material and worldly point also why he should not be. So it is essentially taking him from the highest standpoint to one low point of looking at it from a material level, from the level that we all can very easily understand. So that is where the shloka. So 11 to 25 was the highest standpoint. From 26 on, it is coming down to explaining more at Arjuna's, because Arjuna is in such a state of grief, he can very theoretically understand what Krishna is saying. But in his mind, he's still seeing all this thing of happenings, which is, things are going to die, things are going to be born. So let's see the shloka, where Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, Atha chainam nitya jatam, Atha chainam nitya jatam, Nityam va manyase mritam, Nityam va manyase mritam, Tathapi tvam mahabhaho, Tathapi tvam mahabhaho, Naivam shochitum arhasi, Naivam shochitum arhasi. So Lord Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, not from the Atma standpoint anymore, but from the vyavaharik standpoint, from our point of where we are transacting in this world. So what he's trying to say here is that atha, in case, so Lord Krishna is giving a kind of a hypothetical argument. In case, Arjuna, you think that you don't believe in this self, or let's suppose that you don't believe in this self, because anyway, many people don't really believe in Atma, right? So the point he's coming to here is also the point that maybe an atheist point of view you might take it, or maybe it is a scientific point of view of this one. In all the cases, you will see that a lot of people may not necessarily believe in Atma, they may not necessarily believe in heaven and hell, they may not believe in rebirth phenomena, etc. But they do see that things are getting born and things are dying, right? So there's a continuous aspect of something being born and something is dying. And if you ask the scientists, even scientists will agree that there is a constant recycling that's happening with all the bodies, right? The bodies, when they die, they go back to earth. And when they go back to earth, they become the manure for trees and then the fruits, and then we end up eating the fruits. So it's pretty much the whole recycling is all the time happening anyway. Such being the case, you see how Krishna actually calls out Arjuna here, okay? He calls out Arjuna to say, Mahabaho, Mahabaho, hey Mahabaho, oh great armed soldier. In a way, he's trying to chide him, saying that you who have been crying all this time, can you not even see this? And you're crying like this. And the way you're crying, women might not agree that, even we don't cry like this. Why are you crying? So Krishna is trying to kind of poke him by calling him great arm one, great warrior and all that, but trying to point out to him that you see that even if you don't understand about the self, you do see that all these things are going through a cycle. So why are you crying again? You don't have to cry, is what he's saying. So I just put a pictorial of this in the next thing to show that atachena enam nityajatam nityam va manyase mritam. Even if you think that the self is constantly born, all you consider is dying. So an optimist might say, oh, the world is so beautiful. Look at this. Look at the grass growing. The optimist is never going to look at something which is dying, right? Whereas a pessimist is always going to look at the glass which is half empty, right? So either ways, what Lord Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna is that you don't have to worry. These things happen all the time in a cycle, no matter what. But at the end of the day, you can still understand that life goes on. Life goes on. So he's saying that why even worry about this? Birth and death is certain only for the gross body, right? So it is, again, a very gross argument here. And again, trying to tell Arjuna that the birth and death, you see it, it's only happening for the gross body. So you don't have to worry at all. You don't understand the Atman is the true infinite self, and understand this one. You can see that the birth and death happens only for the gross body. So that is said here. Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityuhu. Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityuhu. Dhruvam janma mritasya cha. Dhruvam janma mritasya cha. Tasmad apariharyete. Tasmad apariharyete. Natvam shochitum arhasi. Natvam shochitum arhasi. So you see, Lord Krishna, the third time, he's trying to pacify Arjuna, or even to make him understand Natvam shochitum arhasi. And earlier also he said, you don't have to grieve, you don't have to grieve. continuously trying to remind him about the temporary nature of the gross body, or temporary nature of the world that we see, and also reminding him earlier on, of course, about the permanent reality. So in both the cases earlier, when he was reminding him about the permanent reality, he wanted to say about how he should not grieve. But now he's trying to say that even all these bodies, for certain, is the death or the born. So that we know, right? Because as we are born, we see death happening. But I think what is really difficult for us to understand, or to even to recognize, is the second line. Dhruvam janma mritasya cha. That is, the dead is not as if they're dead and gone, but the jiva takes the other body. That part of it is what he's trying to say. Now, why is he saying that? Because, again, Arjuna is so worried that he's going to be killing Bhishma and Drona, and they are going to be gone. But Krishna is trying to remind him, saying that, no, dhruvam janma mritasya cha. For them too, there is that birth. So they will be back. So this is inevitable, apariharyete. That is absolutely going to be possible. And therefore, they will be back, and therefore he doesn't have to worry at all. And here, this shloka also is another thing to affirm the rebirth principle that we talked about. And this is definitely, it has been covered in a number of books. I think there is a beautiful book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Williams in the modern psychology world. There are a few other books too, which talks about this rebirth from a Western point of view. But this aspect of rebirth is being covered in our Upanishads, and this is the thing that we are talking about here. There are also cases that have been documented about in India. I think some of the I have read. I think it's mentioned by even Swami Chinmayananda in his book about a few cases where people have been able to trace their birth. But the good thing for us is that we don't remember our previous birth. That is very important. Why do we want to know who we were not friends with, or who we had problems with, or anything, or this one? It's good to. It's enough that we have problems in this world, so we can just deal with that. So, but this is another example of the fact that there is this aspect of rebirth. And Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, for that reason too, you don't have to worry, you don't have to grieve. And an example which can be taken from our own, from what we see in this aspect of ocean and waves. Waves are constantly born and they constantly die, but nothing happens to the ocean, right? So this is the law of universe. We gave also examples of the leaves which comes on the trees. They come, they go, but then the tree continuously, continues to be there. So in this aspect too, we see that there is a continuity that is maintained. So jatasya hi dhruvam, we saw that now. And so with this, we will just chant the shloka and then we will complete. Avyaktadini bhutani, avyaktadini bhutani, vyaktamadhyani bharata, vyaktamadhyani bharata, avyaktanidhanan yeva, avyaktanidhanan yeva, tatra ka paridevana, tatra ka paridevana. Again, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, why do you have to grieve? Again, this is probably the fifth time he's telling him, tatra ka paridevana, why do you have to cry? Because you see that, just like the example of the waves that we gave there, waves were not there in the beginning, but then they become manifest as a wave, and then they die back and they kind of go into a sort of an unmanifest condition. So it's an example we could think of is, suppose you're shooting an arrow in the darkness, and suppose it travels through, from one dark room to another room which is lighted, and then it goes into another dark room. You see that arrow only when there is light, right? The rest of the time, you don't see it when it was in the dark before and when it was in the dark after it passed from the lighted room into the dark room. Does that mean that the arrow wasn't there? The arrow was still there, but it was not manifest to us. So that is the avyakta part of it he's trying to bring here. So next week, we'll discuss this a little more in detail about the philosophy behind avyakta dini bhutani. And we'll continue on to discuss about the second, we are entering into the second topic, understanding how Lord Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna the temporariness and to make him understand why he should not grieve. Do that again, this and then 29 next week. So this question that we didn't take up last time, I had a chance to talk to Ganga today, and I think it's a very deep question, and it needs a little more. We will handle this as soon as we finish a few more shlokas. And the perspective, what she would like to be answered is, why do we look at everything that is happening in our life, every experience that is happening in our life, as always something that we have to struggle? Why are we struggling in life? Why is, in that sense, life a battle? So we will address this after a few more shlokas on this question. Our next session will be next week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kasyat dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shantihi. Om purnamada purnamidam purnat purnamudachyate. Purnasya purnamadaya purnamevavashishyate. Om shanti shanti shantihi. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.